the Cambridge at Home experience. In a minute, we'll be switching live, so to say, to Herbert Puchter. Before I do that, just a few things. Some of you are asking about certificates of attendance. As part of this, you will be able to download your certificate of attendance. My colleague Eve will be putting that in the chat window at the end of this webinar. Okay, so at the end of this webinar, you'll be able to download your own certificate of attendance through the chat window. Also, this session is being recorded and we will make it available on YouTube by the end of today. All of you who've attended the webinar will be receiving an email with the link to the recording so you can rewatch it again or share it later on with your colleagues. As we go along, if you have any questions or comments, please do put them in the chat window. My colleague Eve and I will be monitoring that, and at the end, there will be time for a question and answer with Herbert. So we'll gather any questions you have and relay them to Herbert at the end of the webinar. So I think with all of that in mind, let me introduce Herbert. So Herbert Puchter is a full-time writer of course books and other ELT materials, and he's also a professional teacher trainer. He's been a plenary speaker at various international conferences and has given seminars in many countries in South America and across Europe. He's a master practitioner of neuro-linguistic programming, and for almost 2 decades, he has researched the practical application of cognitive psychology in EFL teaching. He's furthermore a past president of IATEFL, the International Association of Teachers of English as a Foreign Language. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Herbert. Herbert, over to you.
Thank you very much, Eric, for chairing this session and for the introduction. It's good to work with you again. The appreciation is mutual, as you know, as another past president of IATEFL. And I've always enjoyed working with you also when we were both still working for IATEFL. I'd also like to thank Eve for all the technical support she's been giving me in setting up this session. I'm speaking from my office here in Austria. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon here. And I'd like to wish all those of you who are based in Europe a good afternoon, a good evening to our colleagues in the Far East, and a good morning, I guess, to those of you far west of here. It's great to meet all of you in cyberspace, and I'm very much looking forward to sharing some ideas with you on how we can reduce or overcome the physical distance between us and our young learners when we teach them online. Here's a short overview of the points I'm hoping to cover in this session. And as you can see, there is a Q&A at the end of the session. So I will actually be talking for half an hour now. I hope that's okay for you, and we will be taking your questions then. I'd like to start with a short personal anecdote. About 2.5 years ago, my grandson started going to school in a little Austrian village in the middle of nowhere, close to where I live. This would be a photo of the village. The school, the primary school, is about, I don't know if you can see my cursor, is about here. So I decided to come up with an idea that I offered to the school. I would teach my grandson's class English for free if the school would allow me to work with these children for 3 hours a week instead of what is usually 1. Sadly, 1 hour a week is what Austrian state primary schools normally offer to the children. So we'll probably all agree that 3 hours a week is not a lot, but it's a lot better than 1 hour. Anyway, my proposal was accepted, and I've been teaching this class for almost 3 years now, enjoying every minute of what's been a very exciting learning and teaching experience for me. Well, looking back 10 weeks, I remember that communicating in English with those kids was not only fun for both them and me, but most satisfying too. They seem to, I mean, these are not photos from my class. They're just agency photos for obvious reasons. I can't take the real photos because I would need to go to all the parents and ask for permission. That would take too long. So they're just agency photos here. They seem to love the lessons, and their level in all skills was remarkably high, given I only taught them for 3 hours a week. And what's more, I kept getting quite a lot of unsolicited but very positive feedback from the parents. And then out of the blue, everything changed because of a virus. And as you know, this is not the beginning of a dystopian novel, but the reality that we've all gone through in some ways or another. While my recent classroom experience may well be different from yours, what we do have in common is that the coronavirus-induced changes and the need to move the teaching and learning from the classroom to cyberspace was at least initially a surprising, and I guess for some of us, even shocking reality. There's another point I'd like you to consider. If what I've said just a second ago had indeed come from a dystopian novel, the school lockdown could easily have been the turning point at which the teaching of English was taken over by computers. In such a dystopian scenario, algorithms would have been used to develop resources and activities, and the needs of every learner, every single learner indeed, would have been met. The pandemic scenario would somehow have been balanced through mountains of data being available on a global scale. And that's why the success of these so-called adaptive learning programs would have been a given. But this, of course, is where the dream or the nightmare, whatever you want, ends. Let's not forget, however, that several years ago, some people and some publishers had already claimed that adaptive learning systems were basically ready to take over, or to enrich our teaching at least, and raise the efficacy of students' learning to new heights. Far from it. In this current situation, it's clear that educational managers, school owners, ministerial decision makers, and parents alike have understood or rediscovered, I think, how important good teaching is and how important good teachers are. Many colleagues around the world who feel passionate about teaching and who wouldn't want to work as anything other than a teacher have also rediscovered something they've known for some time and frequently applied in their classrooms, or have at least realized intuitively and communicated unconsciously that in order to teach children successfully, whether online or in classrooms, we often find that the passion we feel for teaching kindles a passion in the learner for learning, so that what follows is full engagement, a sense of progress, and the joy of being able to interact with others in and through a new language. Very much, you know, in line with William Butler Yeats's quotation that I've put up here. And this is where the journey started for myself as a teacher of that group of 9-year-olds in their 3rd year of learning English. I'd discovered myself pretty early in my career that we always need to bear in mind that a classroom is not a kind of filling station where the teacher fills the students' empty brains with knowledge, or in our case, language. It's in many ways, the classroom, that is in many ways what Vygotsky calls a zone of proximal development, where the teacher is confident that what learners can do today with help from the teacher, they'll be able to do independently tomorrow. In this particular case, of course, proximal means close to success. So the learner facilitates, scaffolds the students getting on to the next sort of stage in their development. So we're talking about this kind of nudging or scaffolding. Adding to that, the venerable linguist Gordon Wells makes the point that whenever people collaborate in an activity, each can assist the other and each can learn from the contributions of the others. So I promised 10 tips. And here's my first one, my first OTT, online teaching tip. I hope you don't think it's completely OTT. My OTT number one, which is actually, we need to make sure that we offer plenty of opportunities for students to collaborate. In other words, what we see here, the teacher teaching online, so T in the green circle is teacher, and obviously we have a number of students, S1, S2, etc., sitting in front of their laptops or tablets or computers or even mobile phones sometimes. But this is an important social arrangement. But this is by no means the only possible arrangement or even the only possible and advisable one. It is essential, though, of course, for all kinds of teacher-led instructional phases. So as you can see here, there are just a few examples. There are others, of course, for all kinds of short housekeeping announcements, for explaining tasks and clarifying language, for storytelling, etc. But if we believe, as Gordon Wells does, in the socio-cultural dimension of learning, that is, how great a positive effect can be gained from the interaction between teacher and learners, and between the learners themselves, we need other social arrangements as well. We need pair work, for example, and group work. In a classroom, these can be very easily arranged. As you know, we ask each learner, I'm sorry, some of the students have run away, it seems here. Student one can still be seen, but we can't see just the labeling of the other dots, but you know these are the students. So we just ask them to turn to one another, and our classroom is perfectly arranged for doing pair work. But pair work and group work surely can't be achieved in cyberspace. Or can they? Well, I think they can. And I have actually used them. And this is what I'm going to be talking about now. I've actually been successfully using them for quite some time. What I'm now going to share is what I'm doing in my situation. I'd like to stress this. Of course, there may be situations, for example, if your internet connection is very poor, that some of the things I'm suggesting you can't do, or if your students, if some of them are not online, this is of course a completely different story. So please see what I'm talking here as a description of what I'm doing, and not necessarily of something you could all be doing in your situations. But I'm very, very hopeful that quite a few of the suggestions I'm going to make can be applied to your situations too. So here's my online teaching tip number 2. We need a little help from our friends. And our friends in this case are the the learner's parents. In the current situation, of course, the one thing we've been lucky about maybe has been the fact that in quite a few countries around the world, because of the lockdown situations, parents were actually at home with the learners, so they could give them quite a bit of support. So what do we need parents' support for in this case? Well, what I'm talking about is I'm talking about creating what I call a learning buddy system, where students work in pairs as learning buddies. So they do not only take part in the sessions with me, where everybody is involved, they also talk to one another in pairs. They meet online, for example, using Skype or other means, and parents initially help them to set this system up. Once the buddies have agreed to work together, I have experienced it's best to keep these partnerships unchanged, so that students will work with the same learning buddy, not just once, but actually for longer time, whenever you ask them to work in these pairs. Parents and children will know that, and that helps a lot. It's also easier from a management point of view to keep the same learning buddies. We need to give students clear instructions and make sure they understand them. Parents too need to know the tasks, or at least need to know the dates when their children need to do them by. Then parents can organize between themselves when their kids meet up in cyberspace and do a bit of monitoring if they can, and if they have the time. In my experience, thus far, it's been amazing how well parents have supported their kids. Some of them speak English, speak good English, others don't, but they've been extremely helpful in setting up the system. And now, after several weeks of online learning, the children are all very fit, really, and they can connect with each other independently from me. So whenever I ask them to do something with their learning buddies, they do that in these pairs. I have regular online meetings with parents too, and sometimes I write them a group email. I also invite parents to observe their child's learning, and that's something that I think is extremely important. I ask them not to judge it. I tell them and I stress that learning a language is a process where making mistakes is not only unavoidable, it's actually necessary. Making mistakes is a part of learning. And it's important they accept that. It's important that they don't judge their children. And it's amazing, actually. I've noticed that when we meet up, sometimes in cyberspace, also, this is such a small village. I often, see parents when I go running or walking or what have you. So the parents of my learners actually have commented quite frequently that this has been a fantastic learning experience for them. That they have had quite a few aha moments about language learning, and they're comparing this to their own language learning experiences, a few decades ago. If you want to try the buddy system, the learning buddy system out, make sure you occasionally join a pair of learning buddies, primarily so to tell them that what they're doing is great. So praise them for it, but also, of course, if necessary, to readjust their learning process a bit. So which parts of the learning process can actually be done by learning buddies? Well, so this is what I forgot to click here. This is what we need parents for. We need to help them or help us set up the system, help us manage it, help us manage the time to a certain extent also. And so that's why I believe we need to keep good rapport with the parents, and with the parents will be grateful for that. And now the slide I promised, what can be done by learning buddies? Well, they can learn, I'll give you an example in a minute. They can learn new words together. They can do most of the skills work between them. Of course, this depends, like, for example, if you want them to listen to an audio, you need to be able to share the audio in some way. If that is not possible, then of course this part of the skills work can't be done by them. They can do some of the speaking among themselves, and very importantly, they can test each other. I mean, self-testing, I keep talking about that, is extremely important, as we know. It's becoming more popular now, fortunately, and it is a highly effective learning strategy. And so is buddy testing, where students test each other. So I'll give you a little example. Here is a lexical set. As you can see, students first listen to the words, then they check the words with a friend. This can easily be done by students themselves. They then listen, correct these 4 sentences in number 2, and finally, number 3, a little revision of what was done before grammatically, but using the new words from number 1 above. Students play a little miming game that, if you imagine 2 students on Skype, they can do that without problems on their own. So the children can do all this without me, as long as they have the audios for number 1 and 3, and they work with one another mainly to practice the new words and test each other. It may take a little time for them to actually get used to this new kind of learning, but it's all based on standard classroom practice they'll already be totally familiar with. The only thing that it's likely to be different is that when buddies work together, they may find that the activities, because they are doing all the activities on their own independently, they're actually quite more intense, and they're quite more focused in a way than in the classroom, where not everybody all the time at the same time is talking. So students' talking time gets raised here. As I've said, they can do that with listening. They can also do that with a video, as long as you have good broadband. I'd like to try a little experiment and show you just a short extract from a video here. I'm aware that some of you may not be able to see this depending on your bandwidth. My apologies if you don't. I will just play, say, 15 seconds or so. So if you can't see it, please don't be too frustrated. Okay, here we go. I'm stopping it here because I saw that quite a few have no sound. So I apologize. Maybe I have made a mistake. I could hear the sound perfectly well. So yes, I got it. You couldn't hear it. I don't know. Eric, Cambridge, can I get any help? What I might have done wrongly so the sound could not be heard?
No, I'm not sure, I'm afraid. It might be to do with the Zoom setup.
Okay. Well, but I guess you can imagine I use such videos with my learners, and they're watching those things on their own, doing the follow-up activities on their own in their learning among the learning buddies. Sorry, I've gone one too far. Here, if you have a look at this, of course, any kind of role play activities are ideal for this buddy work. Let's have a look at this example here. Students have two role cards, student A and student B. A, you are at the sandwich shop. Choose 3 fillings for your sandwich, order a sandwich and a drink. And B is an assistant at this sandwich shop, and they choose a role card, they prepare the role card, they have some language prompts down here, and then they act it out. If students do something like that, I can see a question now. What course book do you use with your grandson's class? This is the ideal moment for me to do a little bit of, to put my promotional hat on for 1 second. The video you have seen but not heard, and the page you're seeing here, and the previous pages, they are from the forthcoming 2nd edition of Superminds. So I'm kind of working with some of these materials in my classroom, and this is an example. This is another example. So if we want to do that, going back to the role play activities, I think what we need to do is we need to help students use digital recording devices so they can present the outcomes of their learning to the teacher and to other students. Most online platforms or communication platforms, softwares, have such digital recording devices. So teach students how to use them. They love doing this kind of thing. Some are a little bit shy initially. I always tell them that it's also initially it was uncomfortable for me to see myself on video or to hear myself, on an audio recording. And I always tell them the story, which is true, that our voice always sounds different when it's recorded, because there's a little bone in our inner ear that is vibrating when we listen to our own voice, when we speak, but that same bone doesn't vibrate when they hear their voice from the recorder. And so they're very interested in this. And of course, quite a few of them say, yeah, I don't like it to see myself, blah, blah, blah. But then we say that it's actually great, to have those videos, because we can see how we're learning, how we are progressing, etc., etc. The next teaching tip, number 4 here, is arranging students in speaking groups, ideally of 4 students per group, again with the help of parents initially, but I'm always present in those groups. I keep a timetable, so when am I working with which group. These groups, or the work in these groups, follows a specific routine. I start with a little bit of small talk, things like, I don't know, just a few examples here. How are you? Or another time I say, what time did you get up this morning? What did you have for breakfast? Etc. Etc. Then I do a speaking activity, or 2 or 3 of them, depending on the kind of speaking activity. And this would just be one example, grammar based. So students first do a bit of listening, listen and tick the food that someone is putting in the soup they're making. Then they put the words in order. The grammar point obviously here is making suggestions. Shall we put some carrots in the soup? Or how about some onions? Then there is the language focus here. And then I say to 2 students, and the other 2 are watching this, okay, now you practice this and the others are watching it, then the other two, and finally in the end they are making a soup together using the language they have been learning here. An important question. Finally, of course, so this is the final activity here. Finally, we do short phase of self-reflection, where I ask students to basically talk about what they've learned today, whether it was easy or tricky, what they need to practice more, etc., etc., etc. How happy they are with their online learning, with the development of their English. And this is, of course, I just like to stress that, a point where sometimes we need to give them some prompts. So what I do is, if we have a chat window like this one here, I use the chat window to type in some prompts, or when I know exactly what kind of prompts my students will need, because I want them to talk about something that I have planned beforehand, then I'll type it into Word, and I just copy it from Word and copy it across into the chat box. Let me see if I can do that here. Here's my Word. No, I have actually closed my Word, so that doesn't work now. I'm sorry, I apologize. So, but you can imagine, you know, just type it across from Word into the chat box, or if necessary, this is from my teaching this morning. Sometimes when you have problems with technology, just write it up on a piece of paper, and this is your board for online teaching. Anyway, as always, as teachers, we need to be concerned with process and product. In other words, not only with the learning process itself, make sure it runs well, but we also need to make sure we need to get outcomes that we can measure. So here is a suggestion for that. Encouraging students to produce short videos of presentations they give. This is where I hope you don't mind, once again crave your indulgence for me to tell you more about my experience as a proud grandfather. I was explaining in a lesson a few weeks ago, I was explaining to the kids that I would like them to do a short video of themselves presenting something. I call these at-home videos. Topics are my favorite toys, my room, I'm having breakfast, etc. I sometimes show them a little example of this, so they get the idea that it's kind of a show and tell on video, so to speak, and they can use their mobile phones to record those. I was explaining to the kids I would like them to do something when my grandson interrupted me. Just a minute, before I tell you what he said, I need to explain that he normally calls me Herbie. And this is quite a funny story, really. When he was a toddler, he heard a friend of mine call me that as a joke. And he has refused, seriously, ever since, to call me granddad. So 2.5 years ago, before I actually started teaching him, I told him there was no way he could call me Herbie in class. So he said, what shall I call you then? And I said, just call me what other children in Austria learning English from me would call me, Mr. Puchter. So anyway, while I was explaining that I wanted them to do one of those at-home videos, he suddenly raised his hand and said, Mr. Puchter, can I make an unboxing video? And I don't know how familiar you are with current YouTuber style genres. Well, I didn't have the foggiest idea of what he was talking about. Do you know what an unboxing video is? Could you just type in yes or no? no, yes, yes, no, 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 yes, no, 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 no. Okay, thank you. Well, at least some of you don't know it either. So to cut a long story short, this is what Wikipedia says about it. Unboxing is the unpacking of products, especially high consumer products, where the process is captured on video and uploaded to the internet. The item is then also explained in detail and also can sometimes be demonstrated as well. Yahoo Tech places the first unboxing video to be for the Nokia E61 cell phone in 2006, according to Google Trends. Searches for the term unboxing began to surface in the final quarter of 2006. I'm glad to realize that I'm about 14 years behind. Well, I guess my grandson might end up doing this professionally one day. The video he produced was awesome, which, by the way, is a word that he used at least 6 times on his video while unboxing his dad's smartphone and his laptop. Experience for me too. In the speaking groups, and this is the next one, I use an online clock. You can easily get them from the web. To keep the time, I challenge the kids how long they manage to talk without using their own language, German in the case of my students. Number 8, I use a glass jar and some pebbles, so it looks like this, as a reward system. Whenever they express something particularly well, whenever they say something that makes other students laugh, then I drop a pebble into the glass jar, and they know, because I've told them, once the glass jar is full, there'll be a surprise for the whole class. Eye contact is, of course, always important, but what we need to know is if we want to have good eye contact online, we need to look at the camera and not at the eyes of individual students. So when you, for example, want to have eye contact, if these are 4 students in front of you, and you want to have good eye contact with the girl in the down right picture, don't look at her eyes, because this will actually create an impression you're looking somewhere completely different. You actually need to look up there at the camera if you want to give the impression that you are keeping good eye contact with the learners. I also, and this is my online teaching tip number 10 and the final one, I suggest you check their eye movements. It's always good to know where they're looking. For example, if you have something like this, which let's call them 1, 2, 3, 4. So starting, 1 is the girl on the upper left, 2 is the child next to her, 3 the boy below the reddish-haired girl, and number 4 the other girl. Which is the one that would worry you? Number. Exactly. Somebody is saying 3. We're losing number 3. And very often what happens, I have noticed in 90% of the cases, child number 3 here, look at the eyes, is actually looking down at a mobile phone or a smartphone. And this is where I'm, so this is the last one, the last slide, my personal, I need to move this away here, sorry. So my personal conclusions here, online teaching works actually, it can work really well. Some of my students have made a giant leap forward. Firstly, in their learner independence, and secondly, in terms of their language development, especially speaking. I personally have learned a lot from this experience in terms of the exploration of digital learning technology, but also as far as developing an online methodology is concerned. And I'm absolutely sure if you think of some of the things I've been presenting, like the buddy learning system, or students actually producing those at-home videos, etc., etc. My grandson producing his unboxing videos. This is something I will definitely continue once classrooms open up again. Of course, there are many things I miss about the face-to-face real contact in the classrooms. I've also checked out, last night I checked, there's a website what teachers miss the most. And I'd like to finish up with a funny quotation. One colleague said, putting on real professional clothes. Okay, here we go. I'd like to thank you very much. And we're going to have a look at some of the questions now. Over to Cambridge, please.
Thank you very much, Herbert. Fantastic. And thank you, all of you in the audience, for a whole range of questions. So I've captured a bunch of them. First one, very simple but meaningful, Herbert. How old is your grandson?
My grandson is he had his 9th birthday a couple of months ago.
Okay, super. And then related to that, a number of questions such as, would children of 8 years old be able to use the buddy system you described? Would
Yes.
this kind of online teaching work with preschool learners? So maybe a few thoughts of yours around age.
Okay, thank you. Well, let me start with preschoolers. If you do this with preschoolers, you definitely need the parents, I would say. I've never done it with preschoolers, but I think it is possible if you do it with parents present. And as we know, parents would actually love that. So my answer would be yes. With 8-year-olds, yes, definitely. We need to train them well. I mean, some of the kids in the class I'm working with are 8.5. My grandson is over 9, but it's basically the age we're talking about. It's really amazing how well this has worked. It's my experience. You might come across some problems. I have some kids who are very, very difficult in the classroom as far as attention goes. And it's fascinating when I work with them online. I don't know, is it the screen that kind of mesmerizes them? I don't know. But it's actually quite amazing that they seem to focus better online.
Okay, super, thank you. Then there were a number of questions around time and duration and so on. So for example, what's the best length of time for an online class? How many hours of online classes per day make for good student engagement?
Yes, I can't actually answer this question because we would need to discuss what kind of time frame your school is running on, how many hours, how many teaching hours you have. I mean, in the current situation, online teaching is all I can do with my students. So what I did, I only have 3 hours a week. So I kind of like developed a schedule. Some of the things they have to do at home. There's, of course, there's homework. There's workbook stuff that they usually do on their own. And then I meet up with the groups regularly. And I usually do about 20, sometimes 25 minutes for the group tasks. And they take as long as they need for their buddy learning tasks.
Okay. So there's no one fixed answer, and
No.
I would imagine as well it depends on the age of the children and probably the number of children in the class.
Mm-hmm.
We had a number of questions, comments around tech savviness and device capability or device availability of parents.
Yeah.
So maybe some thoughts around how to work with parents who aren't that tech savvy themselves.
Well, I've been lucky here, really. I mean, I had to give some of the parents a bit of training, a few of the parents a bit of training. Quite a few of them have actually used things like Skype before. The ones who haven't, I sort of like taught them how to use it. It didn't seem a particular problem. And the kids really are tech savvy. It's really amazing because they have now taken over. They don't need their parents anymore to help them set up a session.
Yeah, I have the same experience. I've got a 10-year-old at home. He has a daily Zoom call with his teacher. He knows exactly what to do. Yeah. Okay. Have you got any thoughts around teaching children with special needs? the writer of the question didn't specify what kind of special needs, but
yeah, I was just going to say it depends on the kind of special needs, of course. In general, of course, I would say, but you know, it so depends on what kind of needs this particular learner has. You would probably need a parent for that to support you.
Okay. And for reasons of time, I think this might need to be the last question, but it's a good one. How can we promote learner autonomy through online learning?
Well, I hope that I've given you some ideas here, because the buddy system, the learning buddy system, is an autonomous learning system. I have no idea, actually, sometimes even when my learners are meeting up, and I have no idea what they're doing while they're meeting up. All I can say is that when I meet up with a class, and I do that regularly, and I check on what they have done, they have actually done the tasks I've given them. So this is a perfect thing. I mean, for time reasons, I couldn't talk about the development of writing skills, for example. For time reasons, I couldn't talk about how we can train the buddies to support each other, how we can help them to listen to an audio not just once, but to sort of like decide where their problems are and start listening to specific bits of audio repeatedly, so they understand more easily. Or sometimes how they can look at an audio script also to support their listening if there are particular problems. So, I mean, online learning, I would think, is not only a good way of training students to learn independently in learner autonomy. When we do online teaching, we need autonomy to a certain extent.
Super, thank you very much. And also just to let people know or remind people perhaps that we've got a range of articles and videos on our World of Better Learning blog, including issues like learner autonomy, teaching children with special needs, and so on. So thank you very much, Herbert. That's super. And we had lots